Disclaimer. September 26, 2022, 6:32 a.m. The British government bond market imploded. £4.5 trillion in pension fund assets froze. The Bank of England intervened with a £65 billion emergency bailout. Within hours, a financial instrument designed for safety, the liability-driven investment, had nearly collapsed the UK's retirement system. It was not an isolated event. It was a warning shot. Across the Atlantic, a quieter catastrophe has been unfolding for decades. The numbers are staggering. $1.3 trillion. That is the official funding gap for American public pension funds. The real number, using fair market accounting, could exceed $6 trillion. For 80% of public workers, the defined benefit pension, the bedrock promise of a secure retirement, is mathematically broken. This did not happen by accident. It followed a pattern. Thesis statement. This is the story of the pension death spiral. A historical pattern where promises made in prosperity are shattered by the arithmetic of reality. This pattern has destroyed retirement security for generations, from Imperial Spain to industrial Detroit. It is a slow-motion collapse disguised by optimistic forecasts and political lies. And it is accelerating. We introduced the 5-stage pension collapse cycle, a framework proven across empires, nations, and cities. A playbook of denial, desperation, and eventual default. Understanding this cycle is not about finance. It is about survival. Because the largest pool of retirement capital in history, the Western pension system, is now entering the terminal phases. The pattern/framework. The 5-stage pension collapse cycle is a trap. Once entered, escape is nearly impossible. History shows it consumes every institution that follows its path. Stage 1. The generous promise, the political offering. Benefits are expanded during economic booms, funded by impossible growth assumptions. The liability is born. Stage 2. The demographic lie. The workforce shrinks. Retirees multiply. The contributor-to-beneficiary ratio inverts. Managers ignore the math. Stage 3. The desperate gamble. To cover growing shortfalls, funds abandon conservative investing. They chase yield in risky, complex, and illiquid assets. The safety net becomes a casino. Stage 4. The accounting deception. Officials adopt fantasy math, discounting liabilities with unrealistic return assumptions. The gap is hidden in plain sight. The public is told all is well. Stage 5. The inevitable reckoning. The market turns. The gambles fail. The math becomes undeniable. The choice? Outright default, a massive taxpayer bailout, or the confiscation of benefits. From the Spanish Monte Pio Milita pensions of the 1600s, to the British coal mining pensions of the 1950s, to the Detroit City pensions in 2013, the stages are identical. The duration varies. Spain took 80 years to complete the cycle. Britain's industrial funds took 40. Detroit took 30. The United States public pension system entered Stage 1 in the 1970s. It passed Stage 3 in 2008. And after the 2022 bond market crash, multiple major funds are now tipping into Stage 4, the accounting deception. The countdown to Stage 5 has begun. Phase 2. Historical context. The modern pension promise was born from triumph. The post-World War II economic boom created a seemingly permanent horizon of growth. Corporations and governments, flush with cash and confidence, made a covenant with labor. Work faithfully for decades, and we will guarantee your security until death. By 1975, this model had reached its zenith. U.S. private sector pension plans were 97% funded. State and local plans held assets exceeding liabilities. The defined benefit pension was a cornerstone of the American dream, covering over 60% of private sector workers. This was not mere finance. It was political alchemy. Politicians discovered they could purchase labor peace and voter loyalty with future promises. The cost? To be paid by future taxpayers and investors. It was the ultimate deferred transaction. It is the magic of compounding returns, they said. The stock market always goes up. By the 1980s, the system appeared invincible. The S&P 500 returned an average of 17.5% annually from 1980 to 1990. Pension fund assets ballooned. Benefits were sweetened. Retirement ages were lowered. Cost of living adjustments were added. In 1999, at the peak of the dot-com bubble, California's CalPERS, the nation's largest public fund, achieved a 128% funded status. It had a multi-billion-dollar surplus. Politicians used this excess to justify increasing benefits for public employees, notably for the California Highway Patrol and state workers, instead of fortifying the fund against a downer. The message was unanimous, from city halls to Wall Street. The growth would never end. The demography would never change. The math was unbeatable. They were wrong on all three counts. The turning point was not a single event, but a doctrine, the 7.5% promise. In the early 1990s, as returns slowed from the 80s boom, pension fund actuaries faced a dilemma. Liabilities were growing faster than assets. To avoid raising contributions from governments or cutting benefits, they made a fateful choice. They began systematically raising their assumed rate of return. This was the fatal decision. 1980 average assumption, 5.5%, roughly in line with long-term bond yields. 1995 average assumption, 7.5%. 2000 average assumption for many major funds, 8% or higher. This was not a market forecast. It was a political and accounting necessity. A higher discount rate makes a future liability look smaller on today's balance sheet. By moving from 5.5% to 7.5%, a fund could cut the calculated present value of its liabilities by 30 to 40%. It was an illusion, a lie entered into millions of spreadsheets. Nobody saw what was coming. They did. In 1995, economist Jeremy Siegel warned that expecting 8% returns indefinitely was delusional. In 1999, a landmark study by the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College concluded public pensions were using overly optimistic assumptions that created a fiscal illusion. In 2001, Warren Buffett wrote in his shareholder letter, "Pension promises will be anything but easy to keep." The reason is simple. If you promise an 8% return in a 4% world, you will lose money. Period. The warnings were ignored. Why? Because telling the truth meant one of three things. 1. Raising taxes immediately. 2. Cutting government services immediately. 3. Slashing promised benefits immediately. All were political suicide. So, the lie was institutionalized. The 7.5% assumption became the life support for a system already on the decline. It allowed the contribution holiday to continue. Governments, from Illinois to New Jersey, began skipping their annual required pension payments entirely, using this savings to fund immediate spending or tax cuts. The stage was set. The pension system had entered the historical pattern. It had made the generous promise. It was beginning to tell the demographic lie, and it was now wholly dependent on perpetual, market-beating returns to survive. The trap was sprung. Phase 3, the pattern breakdown. Stage 1, the generous promise. This is where every collapse begins. Not in crisis, but in overconfidence. A powerful entity, flush with temporary wealth, makes a long-term commitment based on short-term conditions. The promise is politically popular, financially plausible at the moment, and catastrophic over time. Historical example 1. Imperial Spain, circa 1560 to 1600. Following the influx of New World silver, the Spanish crown established extensive Montepio pensions for its vast military and bureaucratic class. The promise, lifetime payments for soldiers and administrators, funded by what was assumed to be a perpetual stream of American treasure. The reality, by 1600, pension obligations consumed over 60% of the annual crown revenue from the Americas. The silver shipments were already declining. The decision, instead of reforming, the Habsburg monarchy expanded benefits to secure loyalty, embedding a fatal fiscal drain. Historical example 2, British coal industry pensions, 1946 to 1950. Post-World War II nationalization created the National Coal Board, NCB. A cornerstone was a generous, guaranteed pension for hundreds of thousands of miners. The promise, a secure retirement funded by the eternal dominance of British coal. At nationalization, the industry employed over 700,000 miners. The assumption, King Coal would reign forever. The pension scheme was structured with no serious contingency for industry decline. The warning ignored. Geologists and some economists warned of cheaper foreign coal and emerging energy sources. The political need for labor peace was paramount. Historical example 3, Detroit City pensions, 1950s to 1960s. In the heyday of America's arsenal of democracy, Detroit was rich. Tax bases swelled. City unions negotiated increasingly generous pension formulas. The promise, 5 and 2. Retirees could receive up to 2.5% of final salary per year of service, with retirement after 30 years, 75% of pay. Many could retire in their early 50s. The funding assumption, Detroit's population and industrial might would grow indefinitely. The 1960 census showed a peak population of 1.85 million. The turning point, benefits were sweetened repeatedly during contract negotiations, treating pensions as a limitless credit line drawn on future growth. The pattern is absolute. Prosperity is mistaken for permanence. The political payoff is immediate. The financial reckoning is deferred for decades. Chapter 4. Stage 2. The demographic lie. The promises of Stage 1 hinge on a stable ratio. Many current workers funding few current retirees. Stage 2 begins when this ratio inverts. The institution now faces an actuarial truth. It has more people collecting benefits than paying in. The response? Deny, obscure, and delay. Historical example 1. Imperial Spain, 1600 to 1650. The Spanish Empire's population stagnated, then declined due to wars, plague, and immigration. The bureaucracy, however, remained bloated. The ratio, the number of pensioned hidalgos, low-ranking nobility, and retired soldiers grew, while the productive tax base in Castile shrank. The lie, the crown used accounting gimmicks, paying pensions in devalued copper vellon coinage while claiming obligations were met. They pretended the demographic problem was a liquidity problem. Historical example 2, British coal pensions, 1960 to 1980. Coal employment collapsed from 700,000 in 1950 to under 250,000 by 1980. The number of pensioners, however, soared as the post-war workforce retired. By 1975, there were nearly 2 pensioners for every 3 active miners. The lie. The NCB and government used cross-subsidies from other nationalized industries and optimistic forecasts of a coal revival to hide the deficit. The 1974 Plan for Coal predicted rising output. Instead, the death spiral accelerated. Historical example 3, U.S. steel and auto pensions, 1970 to 1990. In 1950, U.S. Steel had 16 active workers per retiree. By 1990, it had less than 1. The auto industry saw a similar inversion. GM's U.S. workforce shrank, but its legacy of hundreds of thousands of retirees remained. The lie. Corporations used aggressive actuarial assumptions about future workforce growth and interest rates to underfund plans. They reported healthy pension costs on earnings statements while the true liability exploded off balance sheet. The demographic lie is a refusal to confront a simple equation. When the number of people leaving the system surpasses those entering, the model is mathematically doomed. The only options are to radically increase contributions from a shrinking base, cut benefits, or find magical returns elsewhere. This desperate search for magic leads directly to the next stage. Chapter 5, Stage 3, The Desperate Gamble. With contributions insufficient and demographics hostile, funds must generate extraordinary returns to stay afloat. They abandon the prudent man rule. Safety is traded for the slightest chance of yield. The pension fund becomes a hedge fund. Historical example 1, the British Railway Pension Fund, 1970s to 1980s. Facing inflation and demographic pressures, the fund made a historic gamble. It invested heavily in tangible, inflation-proof assets. It became one of the world's largest collectors of fine art, vintage cars, and antiquities, spending £40 million, hundreds of millions today, on everything from Ming vases to a 25% stake in the Salvatore Mundi painting. The logic: traditional bonds couldn't hit their return targets. They needed uncorrelated, hard assets. The result: a mixed bag. Some investments soared, but liquidity was terrible. When cash was needed, they often had to sell masterpieces into weak markets. Historical example 2. Orange County, CA, 1994. Although not a pension fund, the Orange County Investment Pool is the archetype of public fund gambling. Treasurer Robert Citron managed money for county schools and agencies. To boost yields in a low-interest rate environment, he used extreme leverage in complex derivatives, effectively betting $12.5 billion on the direction of interest rates. The gamble: he bet rates would stay low. The Federal Reserve raised them. The reckoning: the pool lost $1.64 billion, forcing the richest county in America into the largest municipal bankruptcy at the time. It was a pure, distilled preview of pension fund desperation. Historical example 3. Kentucky Teachers Retirement System, KTRS, post 2008. After the 2008 crash destroyed its funded status, KTRS plunged into high-risk, high-fee alternative investments. By 2016, it had allocated over 50% of its portfolio to private equity, hedge funds, and real estate. Fees paid to Wall Street managers skyrocketed to over $100 million annually. The gamble: these alternative assets would achieve 7.5% returns where stocks and bonds could not. The reality: net returns lagged the S&P 500. The complexity and opacity increased. The fund became a fee factory for financiers while its deficit grew. The desperate gamble is the point of no return. It signifies the fund's leadership has admitted, internally, that traditional stewardship cannot meet its obligations. It is a Hail Mary pass. And as 2022 showed in the UK, these complex gambles can trigger systemic failure overnight. Stage 4. The accounting deception. When the gamble fails to close the gap, the only tool left is the ledger itself. Officials manipulate assumptions, change reporting rules, and employ fantasy math to make the insolvent appear solvent. The goal is no longer to fix the problem, but to hide it until they are out of office. Historical example 1. The city of Pritchard, Alabama, 1999 to 2009. This small city's pension fund ran out of money in 2009. For a decade prior, it used blatant accounting deception. It raised its assumed rate of return to 8.5% in 2000, one of the highest in the nation, while its actual portfolio performance lagged. It simply stopped performing formal actuarial valuations after 2003. The lie: the city council continued to claim the fund was manageable based on outdated, manipulated numbers. In 2009, it simply stopped sending checks to retirees, violating a state law. The deception had run its course. Historical example 2. Japan's Government Pension Investment Fund, GPAF, 2001 present. The world's largest pension fund, managing $1.5 trillion, has been a master of gradual accounting shifts to obscure disaster. For years, it used an artificially high discount rate based on unrealistic return expectations, massively understating liabilities. In 2020, even after suffering massive losses, it lowered its target return only slightly, from 1.7% to 1.6% above wage growth. A fantasy in a zero-growth, deflationary economy. The deception: by using a discount rate tied to unrealistic long-term GDP growth assumptions, it paints a picture of sustainability that independent analysts call pure fiction. Historical example 3. Illinois Public Pensions, 2000 present. The most notoriously underfunded state system has employed pension obligation bonds as a core accounting gimmick. The state borrows money at 5% and claims it will earn 7% by putting it in the pension fund, magically creating savings. It has repeatedly changed actuarial smoothing methods to spread losses over 50 years, making annual costs look smaller. The lie: In 2015, Moody's Analytics recalculated Illinois' funded ratio using conservative, market-based accounting. The state's reported 43% funded ratio collapsed to a 24%. The entire system was, and is, functionally bankrupt on a fair value basis. The accounting deception is the final barrier before collapse. It is the silent scream of a doomed system. It allows politicians to say we have a plan while kicking the can. But the laws of mathematics are absolute. They cannot be voted down or smoothed away forever. This brings us to the final, brutal stage. Phase 4, current crisis application. And the $5+ trillion American public pension system is at stage 4, the accounting deception. Right now, the UK's 2022 liability-driven investment, LDI, crisis was not a foreign anomaly. It was a flare gun illuminating our own coast. It revealed what happens when decades of desperation and deception meet a sudden shift in financial reality. The can that has been kicked for 40 years has now hit a wall. Current evidence. The official lie. The aggregate reported funding ratio for U.S. public pensions is approximately 78% as of 2023, representing a $1.3 trillion shortfall, Pew Charitable Trusts. This is the officially sanctioned number, using an average discount rate of 6.8%. The true math. Apply a risk-free discount rate, using 30-year Treasury yields, for 0.5% in 2024, the standard for corporate pensions, and the picture implodes. A 2023 study by the Hoover Institution recalculated the total liability. The result, a funded ratio of less than 45%. The real shortfall exceeds $6 trillion. That's over $18,000 for every person in the United States. The point of no return. For the first time, major funds are crossing the Rubicon of honest reporting. In 2022, the Texas County and District Retirement System, TCDRS, dropped its assumed return to 6.25% and simultaneously lowered its funded ratio to reflect the new math. It told the truth. The result? Its funded status fell from 84% to 77% overnight. More are being forced to follow. The liquidity time bomb. The desperate gamble has created a dangerous mismatch. To chase yield, funds have poured into a liquid private equity, private credit, and real estate. As of 2024, the average large public pension has over 30% of its portfolio in such assets. These cannot be sold quickly to pay benefits. When the next market downturn hits and contributions dry up, they will face a cash flow crisis of historic proportions. The catalyst. March 2022, present. The end of the 40-year rate bull market. For 4 decades, pension math was bailed out by one macro trend, falling interest rates. As rates fell, bond prices rose, boosting portfolio returns. More crucially, it allowed funds to raise their discount rates, making liabilities shrink on paper. This created a perverse feedback loop of false health. In March 2022, the Federal Reserve began its most aggressive hiking cycle since the 1980s. The 40-year tailwind became a headwind. Bond portfolios suffered historic mark-to-market losses. The discount rate justification collapsed. If future returns are to be higher, why are you using a 7% assumption when risk-free rates are 4 to 5%? The cost of the desperate gamble was exposed. The UK LDI meltdown proved that complex strategies loaded with leverage can blow up in hours when rates move violently. Every government, every union, and every retiree watching realized a brutal revelation. The financial engineering that masked the crisis for 2 generations has stopped working. Stage for indicators in real time. The assumption retreat. 2010, average assumed return, 7.9%. 2024, average assumed return, 6.8%. Direction, down, but still 2 to 3 percentage points above risk-free rates, embedding a fantasy premium. The contribution crisis. The ARC gap, the annual required contribution, is what an actuary says the sponsor, e.g., a state government, should pay. In 2001, states paid 100% of their ARC. By 2021, they paid 85%. Illinois, New Jersey, and Kentucky routinely pay less than 60%. The deception is now budgetary. The demographic cliff. Baby boomer payout peak. The largest cohort of public sector retirees in history is now drawing benefits. CalPERS paid out $28.5 billion in benefits in 2023, up from $11.8 billion in 2013. The outflow is accelerating exponentially. The political can-kicking. Pension obligation bonds, POBs. In 2021, Illinois issued $1.1 billion in POBs. In 2024, discussions are underway for more. This is not a solution. It is borrowing to fund a deficit, doubling down on the gamble that fund returns will beat the bond interest rate. The transparency suppression. Government Accounting Standards Board, GSB, rules, GSB 67 and 68, implemented in 2014, were hailed as reform. They allow funds to use their expected return to discount liabilities. This is the very heart of the deception, institutionalizing fantasy math. It is staged for codified into law. The system is now wholly dependent on the deception holding. It requires perpetual asset inflation, the absence of a major bear market, and the willingness of taxpayers and younger workers to accept a deteriorating bargain. These conditions are now dissolving. Hashtag Phase 5. Consequences and timeline. The pension death spiral is not a financial abstraction. It is a wealth transfer mechanism of historic scale. It creates definitive winners and losers, redistributing real assets and security from one group to another long before the final default headline hits. For the winners asterisk. The financial intermediaries asterisk Wall Street private equity, hedge fund, and private credit managers. As funds desperately chase yield, they pay exorbitant fees for complex, opaque products. In 2023, public pensions paid an estimated $15-20 billion in fees to alternative asset managers. The desperation of pensions is the business model of modern finance. Early retirees and the politically connected asterisk those who retired in the system's heyday, often in their 50s, will collect full benefits for decades. Their checks are prioritized by law and political fear. The system will be drained to keep them whole for as long as possible. Owners of hard assets and inflation hedges asterisk as faith in paper pension promises erodes. Capital will continue to flee to what is real: productive land, energy infrastructure, precious metals, and strategic commodities. The pension crisis is profoundly inflationary, as governments will print to meet obligations, debasing the currency in which the promises are nominally kept. Historical precedent for winners asterisk the rentier class of 18th century France, who held annuities asterisk rent asterisk on the state. As the French crown spiraled into debt pre-revolution, it prioritized payments to these wealthy creditors by taxing the peasantry, until the system exploded. For the losers asterisk. Younger public sector workers asterisk the newest hires face a grim triple threat. 1. Paying higher contributions for benefits they will never fully receive. 2. Being pushed into inferior 401k style defined contribution plans. 3. Working in degraded public services as budgets are consumed by legacy pension costs. Taxpayers in insolvent jurisdictions asterisk residents of states like Illinois, Kentucky, and New Jersey, and cities like Chicago and Dallas, will face a squeeze of higher taxes and collapsing services. Public libraries close. Parks decay. Police forces shrink. All to fund promises made before they were born. Later career retirees asterisk those who retire after the reckoning hits. They will bear the brunt of adjustments. Expect cost of living adjustment, COLA, suspensions first, then means testing, then outright haircuts to promised monthly checks. The social contract asterisk the ultimate loser. The implicit promise that hard work and rule following lead to security is being broken in slow motion. The erosion of trust in this fundamental institution will have consequences far beyond finance, fueling political volatility and generational strife. Historical precedent for losers asterisk the pensioners of the city of Pritchard, Alabama. When the fund went bankrupt in 2009, they simply stopped receiving checks. Dozens died in poverty, waiting for a resolution that never came. The law promised them payment. Reality delivered nothing. Based on the historical duration of Stage 4 and the current acceleration of catalysts, here is the pattern-driven projection. 2025-2030, the fracturing. Stage 4, accounting deception, becomes untenable. A major market downturn, likely within this window, forces a wave of TCDRS moments. Funds reported funded ratios plunge by 10 to 20 points overnight. The $1.3 trillion official gap publicly balloons to over $3 trillion. Political response is fragmentation. Solvent states, e.g., Wisconsin, South Dakota, will wall themselves off, emphasizing their fully funded status and refusing federal bailouts for irresponsible states. Insolvent states will resort to larger POBs and legal gimmicks. The first major city with over 500,000 people will enter a Detroit-style bankruptcy explicitly due to pensions. Federal intervention debates will become a corrosive, permanent feature of Congress, but no comprehensive bailout will pass. The can-kicking will grow more frantic. 2030-2035, the bail-in. The scale is too large to ignore. With several state systems reporting sub-40% funded ratios under any metric, the first bail-in tools will be deployed. These are not called defaults. They are called shared sacrifice or planned sustainability reforms. COLA eliminations will be widespread and upheld by courts. Stacking will emerge. New, lower benefit tiers for years of service going forward. The Illinois model will be proposed nationally, a federal loan program with strict strings attached, effectively placing insolvent state pensions under a federal oversight board. It will be resisted fiercely as a takeover. 2035-2050, the Great Resolution. The system bifurcates into a patchwork, ending the era of the universal defined benefit promise. Legacy systems for those retired before 2030 will be honored in devalued dollars, via a combination of haircuts and implicit inflation funding. Active workers will be transferred en masse to hybrid or defined contribution plans. The political fight over this transfer will be the defining labor battle of the 2030s. The federal backstop will eventually occur, but not as a clean bailout. It will be an ugly, politicized, and partial assumption of certain toxic pension debt in exchange for unprecedented federal control over state budgets. A fiscal reconstruction akin to a debt crisis in a developing nation. The pattern is clear. It has played out in empires, industries, and cities. The five-stage collapse cycle is a script, and the U.S. pension system is in its final acts. The question is no longer if the promised benefits will be broken for millions. The historical record shows that when systems reach this stage of mathematical impossibility, breaks always occur. The only questions are, for whom? How severely? And under what political narrative? Asterisk asterisk. The $6 trillion gap will not be filled by investment magic. It will be closed by some combination of broken promises, confiscated wealth via inflation, and transferred burdens to the young. Timeline. The terminal phase, Stage 5, the inevitable reckoning, will unfold over the next 10-15 years. The triggering event will be a sustained bear market that exhausts the last reserves of accounting deception and political will. You were told it was a sacred promise. The truth is, it was a mathematical bet. And the house, the immutable laws of demographics and compound interest, always wins. Disclaimer. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It presents historical analysis, opinions, and interpretations based on publicly available sources. It is not financial advice, political advice, or a prediction of future events. The five-stage pension collapse cycle is a theoretical framework derived from historical observation. All historical comparisons and references to modern governments, funds, or economic conditions are analytical models intended to illustrate patterns. They should not be interpreted as claims of certainty, endorsements, or accusations. Specific statistics and data points are sourced from public records, academic studies, and reports from institutions including the Pew Charitable Trusts, the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College, and official pension fund financial reports. Viewers are strongly encouraged to research primary sources and consult with qualified financial and legal professionals regarding their specific circumstances. Economy Rewind does not advocate for any specific political or financial outcome. Our goal is to provide a lens through which to understand complex economic forces.